Wave. Sweet.
Wait, is this going online somewhere? Yeah. Cover names?
It's going on YouTube, and I don't think they're gonna see your names. It's rolling.
Cover my first. That's the call. It's going on YouTube? As I enjoy my
banana. I gotta put it up on YouTube.
You won't watch YouTube? Okay, let it go.
It is 1977. In the darkened theater, a movie is just starting. It is a period of civil war, says the opening crawl. On screen, two ships, one being chased by a large cruiser. The smaller ship takes on fire and is soon crippled. The cruiser moves into board. On board the smaller ship, two droids walk by, wondering about the outcome, while the security forces assemble to fight the boarding party. The airlock is breached, and soon a crowd of white soldiers embarks the ship. They fight, and unfortunately the security forces are soundly defeated. Soon they assemble for the appearance of a figure in black, Darth Vader. Perhaps one of, if not the, most iconic villain in all of movie cinema. Let's go 22 years later, May 1999, to the premiere of Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. For years, fans have been wondering, how did it begin? How did Anakin Skywalker evolve into this tyrant known as Darth Vader? They stood in line for weeks. They had mock lightsaber battles, they dressed up, and if anyone asked what they were waiting for, they would just simply point to the timetable and say, idle hands. Finally, they were allowed in. The movie was finally there. They sat down, they watched as it played out, and slowly the enthusiasm died.
I love that movie.
Some of them emerged from that theater completely stunned. The younger generation was still oogling over pod races and mimicking Jar Jar Binks. There was a newscaster and they were asking what people thought about it as people were coming out. Finally, one viewer pushed his way to the cameraman, looked into a lens, and said 3 words. Shit fucking sandwich. How did it go wrong? How did one of the world's most anticipated movies disappoint us so badly? How had one of the greatest storytellers in the world ruined a bright spot in our childhood? It wasn't a matter of money. The film made $431 million domestically and $552 million in overseas box office sales. Perhaps in our high regard for the originals, we set the standards too high for these prequels. After all, there is a generation out there that actually enjoys the prequels. And of course, there is a generation that completely despises them. And then there are a few of us who take the bad with the good. So I'm going to talk about some of the widely accepted bad parts of the prequels, what good did come out of them, and why we can look forward to the future of Star Wars. Before I continue on, I'm going to address the issue of canon. Canon is the overall story of the franchise. So after Disney bought Lucasfilm in 2012, they created a creative storyboard team to address the issue. So in 2014, a huge wave of novels, video games, and comics were labeled as Star Wars Legends, or as Collider Jedi Council used to call it, glorified fan fiction. What was kept as canon is the 6 films, whether you like the prequels or not, 7 if you include the Clone Wars movie, the novelization that went with those films, and the 2 TV shows, The Clone Wars and Star Wars Rebels. Now, for the Clone Wars though, there is a micro-series that was created by the guy who did Dexter Laboratory and Samurai Jack. That's not canon. That is that's considered non-canonical. So anything released after a novel, A New Dawn, is considered canon, with a few exceptions. Star Wars Battlefront is one of those exceptions. It's not considered canon. Chris Taylor, the author of How Star Wars Conquered the Universe, attributes our acceptance of the prequels like that of the stages of grief. The first stage is denial. There are some fans out there who vehemently deny that the prequels ever happened. One example is Mr. Gutta. He was one of those members who saw that premiere back in May 1999. He says, "My girls understand that there is other Star Wars, and that Daddy gets mad when it's brought up. My son is 7. He's got friends at school who watch the Clone Wars cartoons. He says, 'Dad, there are other Star Wars movies.' I say, no, they're not real Star Wars movies." Some even go as far as to mute the audio and play John Williams music in the background with the subtitles on. Or they watch it what is called machete style, where they'll start out with episode 4, 5, they might put in 2 and usually they will put in 3 and then they continue on with 6. They kind of just skip over 1 completely. The next stage is anger. And why are fans angry? Jar Jar Binks is a prime example. Originally, he was created to be somewhat of like a wise man, but George Lucas changed the character at like the last second because he wanted more comic relief. We were going into a much darker universe than what we had seen before. And unfortunately, he became an ill-educated racial stereotype to both fans and critics alike. Another issue was the dialogue. A lot of actors were criticized for their monotonous tone of dialogue. But can you really blame them when the director was more interested in the technology than the actual story? A lot of times the script wouldn't be done until just days before filming, or they wouldn't have a full script in front of them. And since they were filming on pretty much this virtual environment, they had no idea where they were actually standing, how they were supposed to act. They were kind of clueless, and we froze up, and we have this pathetic, stiff performance that we see now. Even Hayden Christensen, he is brutally attacked for his performance of Anakin Skywalker. He couldn't even make sense of the script, so it's partially his fault, it's partially just really bad script that was given to him. In fact, Lucas wrote a draft every 6 days in the 9-month period coming up to episode 2. And no one on his staff ever saw the script. So everyone was pretty much in the dark until the last second. In fact, it got so bad that his creative thinking kind of like, he boxed himself in. He wanted to do all this stuff, but now here's episode 3, he has to finish it. In fact, Anakin's path to the dark side was almost lost, and then it ended up becoming like this messy, disappointing 10-minute transition instead of slowly building over 3 movies. So the next stage then comes the bargaining. A lot of ideas have been passed back and forth. How can we make the prequels better? Can we take this out? Can we put this in? There are copies of what is called the Phantom Edit floating around on YouTube somewhere. I'm pretty sure you can find it. But no matter what, how much bargaining we take, prequels happen, they're now part of the official canon, we gotta live with it. So, which finally comes to our stage of acceptance. So, while the story may have been extremely political, if not hard to understand, the dialogue is flat as a piece of paper, and characters we didn't want, completely misunderstood, or underdeveloped, or simply weren't there, we did have a lot of good that did come out of them. So while hardcore fans turn up their noses to the concept of the prequels, we did have a lot of good contributions. Max Nicholson, who is a contributor for IGN and MTV, created a list of 49 things that the prequels did right. So he noted we actually got to see the Jedi Order. the Sith, which was the face of the dark side, which they were never really mentioned in the original trilogy anyway, and the Chosen One prophecy. Even though a lot of the actors were criticized for their performance, credit was given to both Ewan McGregor and Christopher Lloyd for their performances on Obi-Wan Kenobi and Count Dooku, respectively. And then you also have the music score of John Williams. A lot of favorite tracks such as Duel of Fates, Love Across the Universe, and Battles of Heroes.
Okay.
Boom.
Okay. We'll go back.
And while we had some really crappy dialogue, there are some snippets that were really good, such as Yoda's path to the dark side from episode 1, and probably Padme's best line, which is, "This is how democracy ends," with the thundering applause, with a thunderous applause, which is an allusion back to Nazi Germany and perhaps even our own political future. Then we have the Clone Wars. That was an animated series that was created specifically by George Lucas, with supervising director of Dave Filoni from Avatar: Lost Airbender fame. So that expanded upon the Republic both on the battlefield and in the Senate. We were introduced to characters such as Ahsoka Tano, Clone Captain Rex, and others, characters that we may have briefly seen in the film, but we didn't know who they were until we got to the Clone Wars series. It ran for 6 years. I believe it was nominated for a few Emmys, but it was dropped after 6 years by Cartoon Network, and it kind of just cut. It's up on Netflix right now if you guys are interested in watching it. But that series did show why Anakin was a great warrior and a star pilot rather than this whiny, foot-stomping guy that we saw in the prequels. So, and even though this show was funded by George Lucas and starred by Dave Filoni, it showed that the franchise was still heading for a clear while some yet uncertain future. So George Lucas came out, he said there's going to be no more Star Wars movies. There was the story of Darth Vader had died, that was the end, that was it. So while he prepared Lucasfilm for his eventual retirement and setting up the company so that they continue on without him, he was eventually approached by Disney, and they asked him, "Are you willing to sell the company someday?" Well, George didn't have an answer right then, but he did end up selling it for $4.52 billion. So, and with that announcement came was the named Kathleen Kennedy as the head of Lucasfilm, and they announced Episode 7 with J.J. Abrams being announced as director a few months later. So, world was shocked, and right now anticipation is still mounting. Even though production has been kept as secret as possible, there have been a few leaks. It's gonna happen. But what has been released to us has really excited fans. For instance, fans openly wept at Star Wars Celebration when they dropped that first teaser trailer. And then when they dropped the official trailer in October, just the speculation and fandom has just grown ever since. But we know for sure the original cast is returning with some new characters. There will be a showdown between good and evil, and it will be spectacular. It is August 1st, 2014, and I'm watching the premiere of Guardians of the Galaxy at my home theater. While it's not on the same level as Star Wars, it still brought audiences to a galaxy far, far away, with new alien species, a Han Solo clone that was pretty much Chris Pratt, and a raccoon with a rocket launcher and a muscle bouncer talking tree in Groot. But there was this feeling. It was a warm, inspiring, wondrous feeling that was radiating with the audience. And this is the revelation I came to. This is the feeling that fans felt back in May 1977 when they watched Star Wars for the first time. This is what has been missing from the prequels. So it's been 32 years since Return of the Jedi, 10 since the Revenge of the Sith. And in that time, a new generation has been born. Well, we may be returning to that galaxy far, far away. For them, it's their first voyage. So let them experience this continuing story with that same wondrous feeling. Thank you.